The rust-red nebula of the Seraphim Veil bled across the forward view screen of the patrol frigate Stalwart, a smear of cosmic dust and hydrogen so thick it felt like navigating through old blood. For 6 standard months, this had been Captain Eva Rostova's command, her punishment, and her sanctuary. The Veil was where careers went to die, a forgotten fringe of Federation space where the shipping lanes had dried up, and the only company was the ghosts of failed colonies and the oppressive silence of the Var ascendancy just beyond the nebula's edge. The Stalwart itself was a reflection of its captain's career, old, reliable, scarred from battles command preferred to forget, and utterly ignored. Rostova ran a hand over the worn leather of her command chair, the cracks in the material as familiar as the faint lines around her own eyes. She wasn't a hero. Not anymore. Heroes got parades. Captains who disobeyed direct orders to save a civilian transport from being sacrificed as political bait got exiled to the Veil. Her executive officer, Commander Marcus Thorne, stood at his station with a ramrod posture that seemed to defy the ship's gentle, persistent vibration. He was a good officer, sharp, loyal to the uniform, and a constant, walking reminder of the regulations Rostova had shattered. He cleared his throat, a sound as precise and clipped as a bolt-action rifle. "Captain, long-range telemetry is still showing ghost signals, the usual Veil interference." Rostova nodded, not taking her eyes off the swirling crimson clouds. "The usual ghosts. Marcus, let's just hope they stay that way." The bridge was quiet, a low hum of life support and the soft chime of consoles operating within their expected parameters. It was a comfortable monotony, a predictable rhythm she had come to almost appreciate. The silence was broken by a sharp intake of breath from the comm station. "Whoa, Captain, you need to see this." Specialist Anya Sharma, a young officer whose talent for signal intelligence was wasted on this dead-end assignment, spun in her chair, her dark eyes wide. "I'm picking up a signal. It's slicing right through the nebula's background noise like it's not even there." Thorne stepped toward her station, his skepticism a palpable force field. Another ghost. Specialist a solar flare echoing off a rogue asteroid. Sharma shook her head, her fingers dancing across her console. "No, Commander, this is structured. It's a data burst. Military-grade encryption. But the carrier wave, sir. The frequency is pure VAR." A chill snaked through the bridge, colder than the vacuum outside. The VAR. For a century, they had been humanity's silent, intimidating neighbors. They were an ancient species of crystalline beings who communicated through modulated light and complex resonant frequencies, viewing humanity's radio chatter as the screeching of insects. They never initiated contact. They never deviated from their patrol routes. Their only message, sent once a decade on a repeating loop, was a simple, untranslatable glyph that Federation analysts had grimly nicknamed the warning to stay away. Rostova was on her feet, moving toward the comm station with a predator's grace. "Put it on the main screen. Anya, filter out everything else." The nebula vanished, replaced by a cascade of shifting, alien symbols. It was a waterfall of information, complex and layered, but flickering and corrupted, as if it had traveled through a storm. "It's heavily damaged, Captain," Sharma reported, her voice tight with concentration. "The packet is degrading fast. I'm trying to isolate a coherent segment, but it's like trying to catch smoke." Thorn crossed his arms, his expression a mask of disapproval. This is a violation of the Treaty of Silent Borders. We are not authorized to intercept, let alone decrypt, VAR transmissions. Our orders are to record and report. Rostova ignored him, her gaze locked on the alien code. Anya, can you get anything, a single piece that's readable? Working on it. There's a sublayer, a visual file. It's a stellar cartography chart, but it's nested deep. Trying to pull it out. Got it. The stream of symbols was replaced by a familiar map of the local galactic arm, but rendered in the VAR's strange, three-dimensional light matrix. It was elegantly precise, far more detailed than any Federation chart. On it, a section of space just beyond the veil was pulsing with a dark, ugly blotch, an area labeled with a VAR character that Sharma's software flagged instantly. Translation is rough. Captain, Sharma whispered, her face pale. The closest linguistic equivalent for that character is the Devourer, or maybe that which consumes. The blotch wasn't static. A timeline overlay flickered at the bottom of the map, showing the dark zone expanding, swelling like a cancer. It was moving, not randomly, but with a clear trajectory, aimed directly at the Trappist cluster, a string of independent human colonies that had settled just outside the Federation's official jurisdiction. They were pioneers, libertarians, and outcasts who had refused to live under Federation rule and, as such, had no formal protection. Thorn's voice was sharp. Captain, this is unverified. It could be VAR propaganda, a simulation, a warning to us. We have a duty to forward this to Sector Command immediately. They need to analyze this. Rostova felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew what Command would do. They would convene a committee. They would debate the authenticity of the signal for weeks. They would task a dozen departments with risk assessment reports, all while that dark spot on the map grew larger. She remembered the fire, the screams over the comms, the transport ship Odyssey breaking apart because Command had debated for 6 critical hours before letting her intervene. She had saved half the passengers, but Command had only seen the insubordination. By the time they verify it, Marcus, Rostova said, her voice dangerously quiet, the Trappist colonies will be history. She turned to Sharma. Can you trace the signal's origin? It's a weak signal, but it's directional, coming from deep within the veil. Quadrant Gamma 7, that's VAR territory. Captain, uncharted. Rostova's mind was made up. The ghosts of the Odyssey were always with her, and they were screaming a warning. Helm! She called out, her voice ringing with an authority that had been dormant for months. Lay in a course for Quadrant Gamma 7, best possible speed. Thorn stepped in front of her, his face a thundercloud. Ava, you can't be serious. That's a direct violation of at least 3 Federation protocols and the treaty. We go in there. We could start a war with the VAR. Command will crucify you. They'll strip you of your rank and throw you in a penal colony. They can try. Rostova shot back, her gaze like ice. I'm not going to sit here and watch thousands of people die because of bureaucratic cowardice. We are going to investigate the source of that signal. For the log, we are conducting a long-range sensor calibration exercise in a high interference region. The Veil's magnetic distortions are playing havoc with our navigation, forcing us off our designated patrol route. Isn't that right? Commander. She stared him down, a silent challenge passing between them. Thorn was a man of regulations, of order, but he was also a man who had seen what she had seen. He had been her tactical officer on the day the Odyssey burned. He held her gaze for a long moment, a war of duty versus conscience playing out in his eyes. Finally, he gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. "Aye, Captain. Calibrating sensors." The stalwart turned, its old engines groaning in protest as they pushed the ship deeper into the crimson mists of the Veil than any human vessel had ever gone before. The journey was tense. Every flicker on the sensor screen was a potential VAR warship, every gravimetric shear a possible precursor to an attack. But there was nothing, only silence. After 2 days of high alert, nerve-shredding travel, they found it. Not a VAR fleet, but a single derelict ship, floating in the eerie, red-lit darkness. It was a VAR vessel, but unlike the angular, menacing warships that patrolled their borders, this one was sleek and graceful, a thing of sweeping crystalline curves that seemed to have been grown rather than built. It was a science vessel, the Luminous Inquiry, according to the ship's VAR registry database, or what was left of it. The ship was shattered. Massive sections of its intricate hull were torn open, not by the clean, precise cuts of energy weapons, but by something more savage. It looked like a predator had taken a bite out of it. Scorch marks radiated from the breaches, and the crystal of the hull was blackened and bubbled, as if exposed to an impossible heat. No weapon signatures, no residual energy readings from a battle, Thorne reported, his voice hushed with awe and dread. No other ships in the area. It's been drifting for at least 48 hours. Life signs, Rostova asked, her knuckles white as she gripped the rail. Just one. Faint. Very faint. Sharma replied. It's coming from the ship's central spire. The decision was already made. She couldn't turn back now. Marcus, you're with me. Anya, you have the bridge. Keep the engines hot and the shields at 70%. If anything, and I mean anything, bigger than a microbe appears on that scope, you get us the hell out of here. Understood? Understood. Captain, Sharma said, her voice steady. The shuttle ride across the void was short and silent. As they approached the crippled VAR ship, the scale of the destruction became even more apparent. The breaches were jagged, splintered, as if the hull had been peeled back by immense physical force. They docked near a gaping hole in the vessel's side, the emergency magnetic clamps of the shuttle groaning as they latched onto the alien alloy. Rostova led the boarding party, her pulse rifle held at the ready. Thorne was right behind her, his face grim, flanked by 2 armed security officers. The interior of the VAR ship was a place of haunting beauty and profound horror. The corridors were not metallic, but seemed to be carved from solid light and crystal, with soft, ambient energy pulsing through the walls. But the destruction was absolute. Crystalline structures were shattered into millions of glittering shards. Control consoles were melted into slag. And the air, thin as it was, smelled of ozone and something else. Something acrid and organic that made the back of her throat burn. There were no bodies. No sign of the VAR crew. Just a fine, dark dust that coated every surface. They moved cautiously toward the central spire, their bootsteps echoing in the dead silence. The residual energy in the walls made her skin crawl, a low thrumming that felt less like technology and more like a dying creature's hum. They reached the source of the life sign in a vast, spherical chamber that must have been the ship's bridge or primary lab. In the center, A single VAR was slumped over a massive, crystalline console. The alien was tall and impossibly thin, its body a complex lattice of crystal and light. But it was dying. Its form was flickering, and large parts of its crystalline structure had been vaporized, replaced by the same dark, ashen dust that covered the ship. It was fused to the console, as if it had tried to merge with its own technology in a last, desperate act. As Rostova approached, the VAR stirred. It had no face, no eyes in the human sense, but she felt its attention, a wave of cold intellect and bottomless despair washing over her. It raised one long, splintered limb, and a beam of soft, white light shot from its fingertip, striking Rostova squarely in the chest. It didn't hurt. It wasn't an attack. It was a download. Her mind flooded with images, sensations, and a terror so profound it almost stopped her heart. She saw not a fleet, but a swarm, ships of pure, absolute blackness, shapes that defied geometry, moving through the void without propulsion, consuming everything in their path. She saw them descend upon a VAR world, not with bombs or lasers, but by simply passing through it, leaving a dead, silent husk in their wake. She saw a star being siphoned, its light and heat drawn into a swirling vortex of darkness at the heart of the swarm. The final image was the clearest a wave of this devouring darkness washing over the Trappist colonies, the worlds cracking open, the people turning to dust in an instant. The VAR's last thought, not a word but a pure concept, echoed through her mind with the finality of a slamming tomb door. It is already too late. They are awake. The light from the alien's hand faded, and its form dissolved completely, leaving nothing but a pile of shimmering dust on the console. The connection broke, and Rostova stumbled back, gasping, the alien terror still screaming in her soul. At that exact moment, Sharma's voice, tinny and panicked, crackled through their comms. Captain Massive energy signature blooming off the starboard bow. It's not a ship. It's a rupture in space-time. Something is coming through. Rostova spun around, shoving her team toward the exit. Go now. She glanced at the stalwart's external camera feed on her wrist comp. Out in the red darkness of the veil, space itself was tearing open. A hole of absolute black, a wound in reality, was expanding. And from its depths, something was beginning to emerge. The mad scramble back through the dying VAR ship was a symphony of chaos. The ambient hum of the crystalline walls had become a piercing shriek, and the soft light within them flickered violently, casting strobe-like shadows that made the corridor twist and warp. Thorn. Status on the shuttle. Rostova yelled into her comm, her own breath ragged in her ears. The alien terror the VAR had poured into her mind was a living thing. A cold parasite coiled around her spine, whispering of consumed worlds and dying stars. Docking clamps are still holding, but the stalwart is taking fire. Thorn's voice was strained, the usual parade ground crispness frayed by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. As they burst back into the shattered entry cavern, the void outside the breach was no longer empty. The tear in space was a roiling wound of non-light, and emerging from it was a vessel that broke every known law of starship design. It was a shard of absolute black, a three-dimensional shadow that seemed to drink the light of the nebula around it. It had no visible engines, no weapon ports, no bridge, just a fractal, shifting surface that made the eyes water and the stomach clench. It was fundamentally, existentially wrong. On her wrist comp, Rostova saw the stalwart unleash a full barrage. Twin plasma torpedoes, glowing spheres of incandescent fury, streaked across the void and impacted the black ship's hull. They didn't explode. They simply vanished, their energy absorbed without a ripple, like stones tossed into a bottomless well. A moment later, a sliver of darkness detached from the enemy vessel and lashed out. It wasn't a beam of light or a bolt of energy. It was a line of pure negation that cut through space. It missed the stalwart, but grazed the derelict luminous inquiry. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The section of the VAR ship touched by the beam didn't explode or melt. It deconstructed, dissolving into a cloud of fine, gray dust that was immediately siphoned toward the black ship. "It's eating it," one of the security officers whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Get us to that shuttle!" Rostova screamed, shoving him forward. They launched themselves across the cavern, their mag boots clinging to the deck as the VAR ship began to shudder, its structural integrity failing. They piled into the shuttle, and Thorne slammed the hatch just as the docking clamps disengaged. He threw himself into the co-pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls. "Sharma, we're away. Give us a path." "Captain, they're firing again!" Anya's voice shrieked over the comms. Through the shuttle's viewport, Rostova watched the second lance of darkness slice through the veil. This time, it hit the stalwart's port nacelle. The frigate's shields flared, held for a fraction of a second, and then shattered like glass. The beam carved a deep, black wound into the engine housing, and the entire ship listed, venting plasma and atmosphere into the void. Alarms blared on the shuttle's console. "We've lost primary power," Thorne yelled, wrestling with the joystick. "Life support is failing on decks 4 through 7. We have multiple hull breaches. Just get us clear of the VAR ship," Rostova ordered, her eyes locked on the stalwart. The old frigate was hurt, bleeding, but it was still fighting. Its point defense cannons spat a frantic, desperate pattern of fire, trying to keep the Devourer vessel at bay. "Anya, prepare for an emergency jump the second we are aboard. Do not wait for confirmation. Just go." "Coordinates, Captain, anywhere. Specialist, just get us out of here." The shuttle slammed into the stalwart's hangar bay with the grace of a thrown brick, its landing gear collapsing under the impact. The team scrambled out onto the deck, which was already slick with hydraulic fluid. Emergency klaxons echoed through the corridors, a frantic, mechanical heartbeat for a dying ship. Rostova didn't wait, sprinting for the bridge ladder, Thorne right on her heels. The moment her boots hit the command deck, she saw the devastation. Half the consoles were dark, showering the deck with sparks. A medic was frantically working on the helm officer, whose station had partially imploded. Sharma was still at her post, her face streaked with grime, her knuckles white as she held the jump controls steady. "Now, Anya, jump!" Rostova yelled. The universe outside the main view screen twisted into a nauseating swirl of color and light. The ship screamed, a groan of tortured metal that vibrated through the soles of her feet, a sound like a beast being disemboweled. Then, with a final, violent lurch, silence. The view screen resolved into a placid, unfamiliar star field. They were out. They were alive. But they were crippled. The aftermath was a slow, agonizing crawl back from the brink. The jump had been blind and brutal, shredding what was left of their damaged FTL drive and spitting them out into an uncharted system hundreds of light years off their patrol route. For the next 72 hours, there was no rank, only function. Rostova worked alongside the engine crew, knee-deep in coolant and stripped wiring, patching the life-threatening plasma leaks. Thorn organized the damage control teams. His calm, authoritative voice, a lifeline in the chaos of sealed-off decks and triage stations set up in the mess hall. They had lost 17 crew members, with another 30 seriously injured. The stalwart was a wounded animal, its port side a mangled wreck of blackened metal, its systems held together by jury-rigged bypasses and the sheer, bloody-minded determination of its crew. On the fourth day, with a stable, if fragile, power grid restored, Rostova called her senior officers to the briefing room. The table was still littered with emergency medical supplies, and the air smelled of burnt wiring and antiseptic. She looked at their exhausted faces. Thorn, his uniform singed and his face gaunt. Sharma, whose youthful energy had been replaced by the haunted stare of a combat veteran, and her chief engineer, Lieutenant Commander Valerius, a man who now looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. "The FTL drive is shot," Valerius stated without preamble, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I can get a sublight speed, maybe a quarter impulse if I bypass every safety protocol we have. But we're not jumping anywhere for at least a month, and that's if we can fabricate the parts we need. We're stranded, Captain." Rostova nodded, the weight of his words settling on her like a shroud. She took a deep breath. "It doesn't matter. We're not going back to Federation space." A heavy silence fell over the room. Thorn stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "Captain, with all due respect, what are you talking about? We have a duty to report what we encountered." "I already did," Rostova said, her voice flat. "While you were all saving this ship, I compiled a full report. The derelict VAR vessel, the space-time rupture, the hostile ship, our battle telemetry, the works. I sent it to Sector Command on a tight beam transmission 3 hours ago." Sharma looked confused. "But sir, a tight beam from this distance, without a relay. They won't get that for weeks." "I know," Rostova replied. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her gaze pinning each of them in place. "And it won't matter when they do. I need you to understand what I saw, what the VAR showed me." She recounted the vision, her voice low and urgent, describing the swarm of devouring ships, the worlds turning to dust, the star being consumed. She spoke of the Trappist colonies, of the timeline, of the VAR's final hopeless message, "It is already too late." When she finished, the room was utterly still. Valerius just stared at his hands, his engineer's mind struggling to process a threat that defied physics. Sharma looked pale, but her eyes held a flicker of understanding. She had seen the data, however corrupted. It was Thorn who finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Ava, what you're describing, it's an extinction-level event, but our evidence is gone. The VAR ship was destroyed. Our sensor logs from the encounter are a mess of temporal distortions and energy readings that Command's analysts will dismiss as instrument failure caused by a nebula phenomenon. All they have is your testimony of a telepathic vision from a dying alien. They will not believe you. They will relieve you of command for psychological instability." "I know," Rostova said again. And this time, there was a bitter fire in her voice. "They'll write me off as a mad woman. They'll bury the report under a mountain of red tape and classify it as a VAR provocation. They will form a committee to debate the strategic implications of VAR aggression for the next 6 months while the Trappist colonies burn. I saw it happen with the Odyssey. I will not let it happen again. She stood up, pacing the small space behind her chair. That thing we fought was a scout, a vanguard. The VAR knew it was coming, and it wiped them out. Not just that science vessel. Marcus. Their entire civilization. That map wasn't just a warning. It was an epitaph. The swarm is on its way, and it will hit the Trappist cluster in less than 3 standard months. Those people are undefended, and the Federation will let them die. Thorn rose to meet her, his face etched with conflict. So what is your plan? We are one battered frigate with a broken engine. We can't fight a swarm. We can't stop an apocalypse. No, Rostova agreed, her eyes locking onto his. We can't, but we can warn them. We can give them a chance to evacuate, to fight, to do something other than die in blissful ignorance. Valerius, you said you could get us a quarter impulse. Aye, Captain. It'll tear the ship apart in a week, but I can do it. How long would it take us to reach the Trappist cluster at that speed? Valerius did a quick calculation on a datapad. Just under 10 weeks. We'd get there with maybe a few days to spare, assuming the ship holds together and we don't hit anything. Rostova looked at Thorn. There it is. Marcus, R1. Desperate chance. A chance command will never sanction. This is mutiny. Ava, Thorn said, his voice barely a whisper. You're asking us to abandon our posts, to violate our oaths, to become renegades. I'm asking you to save 3 million lives, she countered, her voice ringing with conviction. I am the captain of this ship, and my first duty is to the preservation of life. The Federation has forgotten that. I have not. She turned to face all of them. This is not an order. This is a choice. We follow our last directive from command and limp to the nearest starbase, where I will be court-martialed and this ship will be dry-docked until the threat is at our own doorstep. Or we go to Trappist. We give them my report, my testimony, the VAR data, everything we have. We help them prepare. What happens after that? I don't know, but I will not stand by and do nothing. The comlink on the briefing room wall chirped. It was the bridge. Captain, the new on-duty officer said, her voice hesitant. We've received a reply from Sector Command. They got your report via a series of civilian network relays. The message is, Priority 1. For your eyes only. Rostova walked to the console and keyed in her authorization. The message displayed on the screen, cold and stark in its official Federation font. As she had predicted, it was an order. The stalwart was to stand down immediately. They were to cease all independent operations and await escort to Starbase 12. Captain Eva Rostova was officially relieved of command, pending a full psychiatric evaluation and formal inquiry. Commander Marcus Thorn was ordered to assume command and ensure her compliance, by force if necessary. Rostova read the words, and a slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. She looked up at Thorn, whose face had gone pale as he read the order over her shoulder. Well, Commander, she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. It seems you have a decision to make. Do you follow your orders? She tapped a command into the console, deleting the message from the ship's logs. Then she turned and walked toward the door, pausing to look back at her officers. I'm setting a course for the Trappist cluster. The mess hall will start serving breakfast in 10 minutes. Anyone who wants off this ship can take a shuttle to the nearest habitable moon we passed an hour ago. No questions asked. Anyone who stays is a traitor to the Federation, and the only hope those colonists have left. She walked out, leaving the three of them in a silence that was heavier than any planet's gravity. The silence in the briefing room was a physical weight, pressing down on Thorne's shoulders until he felt his spine might crack. He looked from Sharma, whose dark eyes were wide with a terrifying mixture of fear and resolve, to Valerius, who was methodically wiping grease from his hands with a rag, his weathered face an unreadable mask. The order from command was unequivocal, a bright, hard line drawn in the sand. His career, his oath, his entire sense of self was built upon the bedrock of that line. To cross it was to cease to be Commander Marcus Thorne of the Federation fleet and become something else entirely, a mutineer, an outlaw. He thought of Rostova, already on the bridge, her back ramrod straight, a solitary figure against a universe of protocol. He remembered the fire of the Odyssey, the way she had plunged the ship into the heart of the battle, defying a vice admiral's direct command to hold position. He had been horrified then, certain they would all be destroyed. Instead, she had saved over 1,000 lives, towing the crippled transport out of the weapon's fire with tractor beams while her own ship's shields buckled. They had court-martialed her for it anyway. Well, Valerius finally grunted, breaking the spell. He tossed the greasy rag onto the table. I've been in this fleet for 30 years, seen good captains and bad ones. Rostova's one of the good ones. And I'll be damned if I let this rust bucket fall apart without me in the engine room. He looked directly at Thorne. My people are with her. Commander, we all saw what that thing did to our port nacelle. We believe her. He stood, gave a curt nod, and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. A single, decisive vote cast. Thorne turned to Sharma. She was younger, a product of the Academy's finest training, steeped in the same regulations he was. Anya. She swallowed hard, but her gaze didn't waver. Sir, I analyzed the VAR data burst. It was corrupted. Yes, but the telemetry, the energy decay signature of the signal source, it matches the readings I got from that rupture in space. Command's analysts won't see it because they'll be looking for proof of VAR aggression. They'll be looking for the wrong thing. Captain Rostova is right. They won't listen. Her voice dropped to a whisper. My family helped settle the Kepler 186 system. They were pioneers. Just like the people in the Trappist cluster. If it were them, I'd want someone to come. I'd want someone to break the rules. She, too, stood and left, leaving Thorne alone in the stark, echoing room. His choice was clear. Uphold his duty and arrest the captain he respected more than any other officer he had ever served, seizing command of a ship whose crew would now view him as a jailer and a coward. Or he could throw away a lifetime of service, his reputation, his future, everything, for a chance, a slim, desperate, insane chance to be on the right side of history. He walked out of the briefing room and headed not for the bridge, but for the ship's armory. 10 minutes later, he strode onto the command deck. Rostova was at the helm, keying in the initial sublight coordinates herself. The remaining bridge crew watched him, their expressions tense, waiting for the confrontation. Rostova didn't turn as he approached. Have you come to arrest me? Marcus, she asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the starfield. No. Captain," Thorn replied, his voice firm. He unholstered the sidearm he had just requisitioned and placed it decisively on the console next to her. "I've come to relieve the helm. You have a ship to command, and I have a station to man." A flicker of surprise, of profound relief, crossed her face. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, he saw not the weary, disgraced captain, but the brilliant tactician she had once been. "Welcome to the rebellion, Commander," she said with a grim smile. The first few weeks were a strange purgatory. The stalwart, pushed far beyond its operational limits, groaned and shuddered its way through the void. Life aboard became a relentless cycle of damage control and rationing. Valerius and his engineering team performed daily miracles, cannibalizing non-essential systems, patching microfractures with cold welds, and coaxing the dying engines to hold together for one more day. The entire crew was on edge, the adrenaline of their choice giving way to the cold, hard reality of their situation. They were alone, hunted, and flying toward a potential apocalypse. Rostova was the iron core around which the ship's morale was forged. She was everywhere. One shift in the engine room helping Valerius recalibrate a plasma conduit. The next in the mess hall, sharing a meal of nutrient paste with a group of nervous young ensigns. She shared the VAR's vision with the entire crew, holding a ship-wide briefing where she laid out the stakes, not as a commander giving orders, but as a leader asking for their trust. "The Federation has forgotten us," she told them, her voice echoing through the ship's internal comms. "It has forgotten the people on the frontier. But we haven't. What we do next, we do for them. We are the stalwart. We will hold the line, even if we are the only ones left to hold it." Her words, and the shared, terrifying experience of their escape, galvanized the crew. They were no longer a Federation frigate. They were something new, a ship of outlaws with a singular, desperate purpose. As they neared the Trappist cluster, Sharma managed to tap into the local civilian comms network. What they found was a chaotic but vibrant tapestry of human life. The Trappist colonies were a loose confederation of 7 habitable worlds orbiting an ultra-cool red dwarf star, populated by a fiercely independent mix of corporate prospectors, religious separatists, and anti-authoritarian idealists. Their central governing body was a council of elected planetary governors who met infrequently and agreed on little beyond mutual non-interference. They had no unified military, only a handful of privately owned security fleets and system defense monitors. They were, Rostova realized with a sinking heart, completely unprepared. "We can't just drop in and announce the end of the world," Thorn argued during a strategy meeting. "Their independence. They'll see a Federation frigate, even a battered one, as a threat. They'll think it's a pretext for annexation. They'll laugh us out of the system. Or worse, open fire." He's right. Rostova agreed, studying the political breakdown Sharma had prepared. "We need an ally on the inside. Someone with influence. Someone who might actually listen." Her eyes fell on the profile of Governor Kalen Yoritz of Trappist 1E, a world known as Haven. Yorick was a former Federation military strategist who had resigned his commission in protest over the handling of a border skirmish 20 years prior. He was a known pragmatist and a respected, if somewhat isolationist, figure on the council. "Him," Rostova said, pointing to Yorick's file. "He'll understand the language of threat assessment. He won't dismiss us out of hand. Contacting him, however, was a delicate matter. They sent a coded, encrypted message on a civilian frequency, identifying themselves only as a concerned independent vessel with urgent intelligence regarding a system-wide threat. They included a small, carefully selected fragment of the VAR data, enough to be intriguing, but not enough to be dismissed as fantasy. For 2 days, there was no reply. The stalwart held his position at the edge of the system, running on minimal power to avoid detection by local patrols. Nerves on the bridge were stretched to the breaking point. Maybe he ignored it, Sharma fretted. Maybe they think we're pirates. Then, a reply came. It was simple and direct, encrypted with a cipher that was decades old but unmistakably military grade. It contained a set of coordinates for a rendezvous in the asteroid belt between the 5th and 6th planets, and a single phrase, "Show me the monster." "It's a trap," Thorne said immediately. "He'll have his security fleet waiting to ambush us." "I don't think so," Rostova countered, studying the message. "That cipher, it's an old fleet reconnaissance code. It's a test. He's telling us he's willing to listen. But we have to prove we're who we say we are." She made the decision. "We go." The stalwart limped into the designated coordinates, its remaining weapons powered down, its shields offline, a gesture of trust they couldn't truly afford. As they rounded a massive, iron-rich asteroid, a single ship came into view. It was a sleek, heavily modified corporate destroyer, the Vigilance, Jorik's personal flagship. It was alone. Hailing frequencies opened. "This is Governor Jorik of Haven." A calm, measured voice announced, "You claim to have information of vital importance. I am here to receive it. You have 5 minutes to convince me not to vaporize your ship for trespassing." Rostova stepped in front of the comms camera, her face set and serious. "Governor Yorich, I am Captain Eva Rostova, formerly of the Federation Starship Stalwart. My ship and I have deserted our post to bring you a warning. We have not come to threaten you. We have come to help you." For the next hour, she laid it all out at the VAR signal. The derelict ship, the vision, the Black Devourer, their desperate escape, and the cold, hard timeline that was ticking down to zero. She had Sharma transmit the full, unredacted VAR data, the stalwart's corrupted sensor logs, and the damage reports from their battle. It was a wild, unbelievable story. A renegade captain's fever dream. But the evidence, fragmented as it was compelling. The alien star charts, the energy readings that defied conventional physics, the catastrophic damage to a frigate-class warship. It painted a grim picture. A long silence followed her transmission. The Vigilance floated opposite them, impassive and silent. Thorne shifted his weight, his hand hovering near the tactical console. Finally, Jorik's voice returned, and the hard edge was gone, replaced by a deep, weary gravity. "Captain Rostova, 20 years ago, I watched my entire squadron get wiped out because Federation Command refused to believe our long-range sensor readings of an unidentified fleet. They called it a sensor ghost. 250 people died because of their arrogance. I believe you." The relief on the stalwart's bridge was so thick you could taste it. "The problem," Jorik continued, "is that the rest of the council will not. They are short-sighted fools, more concerned with trade tariffs and mining rights than with existential threats. If I bring this to them, they will bury it in committee and accuse me of warmongering to consolidate my own power. Then what do we do? Rostova asked, a cold dread seeping back into her. We have less than a month, and you and I, Jorix said, are going to give them proof they can't ignore. His plan was audacious and incredibly dangerous. He proposed that the stalwart with its superior, if damaged, long-range sensors act as a scout, venturing back toward the edge of the system to find a lone devourer vessel. Jorik's fleet, meanwhile, would position itself for an ambush. They would capture footage of the entity, broadcast it live across the entire TRAPPIST network, and force the Council's hand. It was a live-fire exercise, he would call it, to demonstrate a new threat actor in the region. We'll be the bait, Thorn realized, his face grim. Precisely, Yorick replied. But you won't be alone. Welcome to the TRAPPIST militia. Captain, I hope your ship is up for one more fight. The die was cast. The rogue frigate and the governor's private fleet became a single, desperate unit. Valerius and Yorick's engineers worked around the clock, sharing resources and expertise. Parts from the Vigilance were ferried over to the Stalwart, breathing new life into its crippled systems. The FTL drive was still a wreck, but they managed to restore full impulse power and reinforce the ship's damaged shields. For the first time since fleeing the Veil, the crew of the Stalwart had allies. They had a home, however temporary. They had a mission. And as they flew back out into the darkness to hunt their monster, Rostova stood on her bridge not as an exile, but as a commander, ready to lead the first battle in a war for humanity's survival. The hunt was a taut, nerve-shredding affair. For 3 weeks, the Stalwart prowled the periphery of the TRAPPIST system, a lone vessel casting a wide net of deep space sensors into the abyss. Jorik's small fleet of 5 destroyers and a dozen nimble corvettes lay in wait, hidden within the chaotic gravimetric tides of a dense asteroid cluster, maintaining absolute calm silence. The plan was simple, but its execution relied on a terrifying gamble that the Devourers were predictable, that their scouts moved ahead of the main swarm, and that one would pass close enough to be detected. Every day that passed, the tension on the Stalwart's bridge grew thicker. The crew, buoyed by their new alliance, now felt the crushing weight of the ticking clock. They had just over a week left, according to the VAR timeline. Anything? Anya, Rustova asked, the question of familiar ritual that began and ended every shift. Sharma shook her head, her face etched with fatigue. Nothing, Captain. Just the usual background radiation. If they're out there, they're running colder than the void itself. They're out there, Rostova murmured, more to herself than to her crew. The memory of the VAR's vision was a constant, cold companion, a ghost at the edge of her thoughts. She could feel the swarms approach, a psychic pressure that had nothing to do with sensors or science. On the 23rd day of the patrol, it happened. A flicker, not a signal or an energy reading, but a distortion, a brief, localized warping of space-time at the extreme edge of their sensor range. It was exactly what Sharma had detected just before the rupture in the Seraphim Veil. I have it, Sharma whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and triumph. Bearing 015, Mark 30. It's subtle, but it's there. A moving gravimetric anomaly. Is it heading for the system? Thorn asked, his voice sharp. Sharma ran a projection. The anomaly was moving slowly, almost drifting, but its trajectory was an unerring line pointed directly at the heart of the TRAPPIST cluster. On its current course, it will pass within 10 million kilometers of Jorik's position in 72 hours, she reported. Rostova's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Their one shot. Alert the governor. Tell him the monster is coming to his party, she ordered. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the cold fear that gripped her. Helm, bring us about. Slow impulse. We're going to shadow it from a safe distance. I want a full sensor profile before we spring the trap. For 2 days, the stalwart played a deadly game of cat and mouse, stalking the invisible predator through the void. As they drew closer, their instruments began to register the thing's true nature. It radiated no heat, no energy, no emissions of any kind. It was a perfect thermodynamic sink, a hole in the universe that was visible only by the way it bent the light of distant stars around its unseen mass. It was the Scout, identical to the one that had crippled them. It's not deviating, Thorne reported, his eyes glued to the tactical display. It's like we're not even here. It doesn't care if we're here. Rostova corrected him. It has its mission. It's a wolf, and it can smell the sheep in the fold. The moment of truth arrived. The anomaly slid silently into the prearranged ambush zone. Rostova took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the comm panel. All stations, report readiness. Green lights blinked across the board. Governor Yorich, the bait is on the hook. The stage is yours. The response from the Vigilance was immediate. Understood. Stalwart. All vessels. Execute. From the cover of the asteroid field, Jorik's fleet erupted. Engines flared to life as the destroyers and corvettes surged forward, forming a pincer movement designed to surround the target. Simultaneously, a series of high-yield gravitic mines detonated in a precise pattern behind the anomaly, creating a temporary but powerful distortion wall to cut off its retreat. Broadcast is live, Sharma announced, patching the feed from Jorik's ships to the main view screen. Every public and private comms channel in the TRAPPIST cluster is now seeing this. The view was from the bridge of the Vigilance. Jorik stood center screen, his face calm and resolute. To the people of the TRAPPIST colonies, he began, his voice booming with authority. For several weeks, my administration has been tracking a new and unidentified threat. Today, we confront it. What you are about to witness is not a drill. On his command, the fleet opened fire, a coordinated storm of plasma cannons, railgun slugs, and laser batteries converged on the empty point in space where the Devourer was calculated to be. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The sheer volume of energy impacting a single point created a massive, incandescent fireball. But just as before, the energy was simply absorbed. The fireball collapsed inward, swallowed by the unseen vessel. Then, the black ship revealed itself. It didn't decloak or shimmer into existence. The space it occupied simply went dark, a shard of pure blackness against the stars, more defined now that it was actively feeding. A collective gasp went through the Stalwart's bridge. On the live feed, the shock among Jorik's crew was palpable. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Jorik commanded, but it was too late for one of the corvettes. A tendril of darkness, the same deconstructing beam they had faced, lashed out. The small ship's shields vaporized, and the beam sliced through its reactor core. The corvette didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing in on itself in a silent, horrifying flash of light before turning to a cloud of gray dust that was drawn into the devourer. The public broadcast erupted into chaos. Panicked voices from the different colony worlds flooded the comms, a rising tide of fear and disbelief. What was that? Gods. They just killed the Star Chaser. Yorick, what have you led us into? The Devourer ignored the remaining small ships and began to accelerate. Its target now cleared the Vigilance, the largest vessel in the fleet. He can't stand up to that thing alone, Thorn said, his knuckles white. Rostova's mind raced. Their role was to observe, to provide proof, but watching Jorik and his people get slaughtered was not an option. Anya, get me a firing solution. Target its projected position just ahead of the Vigilance. Valerius, give me everything you've got for one full salvo from the main cannons. Divert all power, even life support if you have to. Captain, we do that. Our engines will overload, Valerius protested. Just do it, she snapped. Helm, hard to starboard. Bring us into the fight. The Stalwart, the battered renegade frigate, swung around and charged. On the live broadcast across the 7 worlds, a new ship suddenly entered the fray. A scarred, unfamiliar vessel of clear Federation design, moving to intercept the monster. Rostova's voice cut through the panicked chatter, overriding the main channel. This is Captain Rostova of the Starship Stalwart. We are engaging the hostile. Governor Jorich, break off and regroup your forces. We will draw its fire. The Stalwart's main plasma cannons, overloaded with power, fired a single, brilliant blue-white lance of energy. It was a desperate shot, far more powerful than the ship was designed to handle. The beam struck the black ship, and, for the first time, it had an effect. The Devourer's shadowy form flickered, and a low, resonant hum vibrated through the Stalwart's hull, not a sound, but a pressure wave that made their teeth ache. The Devourer had felt it. It abandoned its pursuit of the Vigilance and turned its attention to the new, more potent threat. A lance of absolute black sliced through space. Brace for impact, Thorn yelled. The beam hit them dead center. The reinforced shields they had jury-rigged with Jorik's help flared violently, holding for 3 agonizing seconds before shattering. The beam carved a molten black trench across the Stalwart's dorsal hull, narrowly missing the bridge. The ship screamed, alarms blaring as entire sections lost power and atmosphere. We're hit massive damage to decks. 2 and 3 weapon systems are offline, Sharma shouted over the cacophony. But they had done it. They had bought Jorik the time he needed. The Vigilance and the remaining destroyers had pulled back and were now peppering the Devourer from a distance, their fire less effective but relentless, forcing the creature to divide its attention. On the main view screen, Jorik's face was grim. Captain Rostova, you have their attention. Now what's the plan? The plan? Rostova gritted out, her hands gripping the command chair as the deck buckled beneath her, is to kill it. She remembered the VAR science vessel, the way it had been torn apart, as if by physical force. It absorbs energy, but what about kinetic impact, Thorn? Target the asteroid field. Find me the biggest, densest rock out there. Thorn's fingers flew across the tactical console. Got one. Nickel iron composite. Mass is approximately 3 million metric tons. Can our tractor beam handle it? Valerius's voice crackled over the comm. The emitters are shot. Captain, I can give you a pulse. Maybe 5 seconds worth. But that's it. 5 seconds is all I need, Rostova said. a wild, desperate idea forming in her mind. Yorick, I need you to keep that thing busy. Pin it down. Force it to hold its position for 10 seconds. How? Yorick demanded. Use your gravity mines. Reconfigure them for a tractor-style pull instead of a push. Create a gravitic pincer. It was a crazy, unorthodox tactic, something no textbook would ever recommend. But Yorick didn't hesitate. Done. The plan unfolded in a breathtaking display of coordinated insanity. Yorick's destroyers darted in, deploying their modified mines on either side of the black ship. The mines activated, and shimmering fields of gravitic force locked onto the devourer, holding it in place like an insect pinned to a board. The creature writhed, its shadowy form distorting as it fought against the pull. At the same time, the stalwart, bleeding from its wounds, fired its last tractor beam pulse at the massive asteroid Thorn had targeted. The beam latched on, and with a final, shuddering groan from its overloaded emitters, the frigate flung the mountain of rock and iron across space. The asteroid, accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light, became a colossal railgun slug. It hurtled toward the trapped devourer, a silent, unstoppable hammer of cosmic justice. The entire TRAPPIST cluster watched, holding its breath. The asteroid struck. There was no explosion, no flash of light. There was only a sound, a psychic shriek that tore through the comms, a sound of agony and rage that echoed in the minds of every human in the system. The black ship shattered, not like metal, but like obsidian glass. A million sharp, dark fragments scattered into the void, and then, one by one, dissolved into nothingness. It was over. The monster was dead. The comms channels were silent for a long moment, and then they exploded. Cheers erupted from the bridge crews of Yorick's fleet across the 7 worlds. A wave of collective relief and celebration began. They had won. On the bridge of the Stalwart, there was no cheering. The ship was dying. Primary power is gone, Valerius reported, his voice heavy with defeat. Life support is failing ship-wide. We are dead in the water. Captain. The victory had cost them everything. As the surviving crew began the grim process of abandoning ship, ferried over to the Vigilance, Rostova took one last walk through her vessel. She touched the scarred walls, the dark consoles, the cracked leather of her command chair. The Stalwart had been her exile, her sanctuary, and, in the end, her perfect weapon. She had held the line. She was the last one to leave, stepping onto Yorick's brightly lit bridge to the solemn, respectful silence of his crew. They looked at her not as a renegade, but as a savior. Yorick met her at the airlock, his hand extended. You have the gratitude of the TRAPPIST colonies. Captain, he said. Before she could reply, a priority alert flashed on his command console. It was a message from the Council of Governors, a panicked, unified plea. Sharma, who had been given a temporary station on Yorick's bridge, brought the information to them, her face ashen. Governor, Captain, our deep space observatories are picking it up now. The VAR timeline was accurate. What we just fought, it was a single scout. The swarm has just entered the system. On the main view screen, the image shifted from the debris field of their victory to a long-range telescopic view of the system's edge. It was a patch of darkness, a tide of absolute black dotted with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of the devouring ships, pouring into the TRAPPIST cluster like a river of death. Their victory had been a single, meaningless battle. The war had just begun. The celebration died in an instant, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence that rippled across the 7 worlds of the TRAPPIST cluster. The live feed that had shown their miraculous victory now displayed the chilling, inexorable advance of the Devourer swarm. It was a cancer spreading across the star charts, a wave of pure negation that made their single, hard-won victory feel like a child throwing a stone at a tidal wave. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the mood was grim. Jorix stared at the screen, the lines on his face deepening into canyons of despair. His entire fleet, battered and bruised from the fight with the Scout, consisted of 4 destroyers and 10 corvettes. It was a coastal patrol, not a navy, and facing them was an armada of physics-defying horrors. Rostova stood beside him, the exhaustion of the battle settling into her bones like ice. She watched the swarms advance, her strategist's mind stripping away the terror and seeing only the terrifying logic of the attack. They weren't moving in a chaotic mass. They were spreading out in a calculated, ever-expanding sphere, a net designed to envelop the entire system at once. There would be no escape. "How long?" she asked, her voice low and steady. Sharm, her fingers flying across the new console, didn't look up. "Their speed is incredible. They'll reach the outer colony, TRAPPIST 1H, in less than 48 hours. The Central Worlds, including Haven, in 72. 3 days. They had bought themselves 3 days to witness their own extinction. The comms channels, which had been filled with cheers moments before, were now a cacophony of panic. The Council of Governors was in a frantic, useless emergency session, their voices overlapping in a babble of blame and fear. "We need to evacuate," one screamed. "Evacuate to where in what?" another countered. "Our transport fleet can't even move 1/10 of our population in a month. We must surrender. Try to communicate. Communicate with what did you not see, what it did to the Star Chaser?" Jorix slammed his fist on the console, silencing the channel. "Fools," he spat. "They'll debate until the sky goes dark." He turned to Rostova, his eyes filled with a terrible, newfound respect. "You were right about them. You were right about everything. We have 1 ship of the line, 4 destroyers, and a handful of glorified gunboats against 1,000 of those things. What do we do?" Captain Rostova's gaze was distant, looking past the tactical display and into the abyss. The VAR's last message echoed in her mind. It is already too late, but the VAR had faced the swarm alone. Humanity, fractured and foolish as it was still here. "We can't win a fleet engagement," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the tension on the bridge. "Fighting them head-on is suicide. They absorb energy, and their weapons deconstruct matter. We have no counter. So we run," one of Jorix's officers asked, his voice laced with shame. "No," Rostova said, a flicker of an idea, born from the VAR's desperate final act, beginning to form in her mind. "We don't fight the ships. We fight what's controlling them." Thorn, who had been silently observing from the back of the bridge, stepped forward. "A central intelligence, a queen, a hive mind." "Exactly," Rostova affirmed, turning to face him. "They move with too much coordination to be independent units. The scout we fought was an automaton, a drone. But the swarm, that is an organism. And every organism has a heart." The VAR fused with his own ship's console, trying to send a warning. He was a scientist. What if he wasn't just sending a map? What if he was sending us the key? She moved to Sharma Station. Anya, the VAR data burst. The deepest layers, The ones we couldn't decrypt. Can you isolate the carrier wave itself? Not the content, but the resonant frequency it was broadcast on. Sharma's eyes lit with understanding. You think it's a command frequency. I think it's the frequency they use to talk to each other, Rostova said. If we can replicate it, we might be able to disrupt their coordination, sow chaos in the herd. It was a wild long shot, a 1 in a billion chance, but it was the only chance they had. For the next precious few hours, a desperate plan was forged. While Sharma and Yorick's top technicians worked frantically to isolate and replicate the VAR frequency, Valerius was brought aboard the Vigilance. His new, impossible task was to oversee the modification of every gravity mine in the Trappist arsenal. They weren't to be weapons of destruction, but tools of containment. The plan was as insane as it was brilliant. They would allow the swarm to penetrate the system. As the Devourers began to converge on the most populous inner worlds, Jorik's fleet, along with every civilian ship capable of mounting a mine launcher, would deploy a massive, system-wide net of gravitic tractor pull mines. They would use the swarm's own momentum against it, creating a gravity well, a temporary cage to hold the bulk of the fleet in place. While the net held, one ship would have to make a suicide run into the heart of the swarm, broadcasting the disruptive VAR frequency on an omnidirectional pulse. That ship would be the Vigilance, the only vessel with a power core strong enough to generate a broadcast of that magnitude. It'll be a one-way trip, Jorik stated, his face grim. The moment we pulse, every one of those things will turn on us. We'll be torn apart in seconds. But those seconds might be enough to break their network, Rostova finished. To turn the swarm from an army into a mindless mob. It might give the colonies a fighting chance to pick them off one by one. Word of the plan spread. Hope, fragile but fierce, replaced the panic. The bickering governors fell silent, their authority supplanted by the stark reality of survival. Under Yorick and Rostova's joint command, the entire Trappist cluster mobilized. Miners, traders, and farmers welded mine launchers to their freighters and asteroid tugs. A civilian armada, a fleet of improbable warships, took to the void. The final hours were a blur of frantic preparation. Rostova stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, the command she had never asked for now resting squarely on her shoulders. Jorik stood beside her, a true partner in this final desperate act. Thorn was tactical, coordinating the civilian fleet, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the storm of comms traffic. The swarm came. It was a tide of silent, black ships, a moving eclipse that blotted out the stars. They swept past the outer planets, ignoring the now evacuated colonies. Their goal, the system's gravitational center, the densely populated worlds of Haven and Eden. They're in position, Thorn announced, his voice tight. All ships, deploy the net. Now, across the system, hundreds of mines were launched. They didn't explode. They activated, their tractor fields linking together to form a vast, invisible net of pure gravity. The front line of the Devourer swarm hit the net and faltered. Their unnatural propulsion fought against the sudden, immense gravitational pull. Ships began to collide, their perfect formation breaking as chaos rippled through their ranks. "It's working," Sharma cried. "They're trapped, but the net was already straining. The combined force of the swarm was immense, and the mine generators were beginning to overload. We have minutes, at best." Valerius's voice crackled over the comm. Now, Captain Yorick said, his hand hovering over the broadcast control. Rostova looked out at the writhing mass of black ships. At the heart of the storm they were about to enter. She thought of her crew on the Stalwart, of the VAR scientist's final sacrifice, of the 1,000 souls on the Odyssey. Her path had led her here, to this one, final act of defiance. "Take us in, Commander," she said to Yorick. The Vigilance plunged into the swarm. The black ships swarmed them, lashing out with their deconstructing beams. The ship's shields, powerful as they were, bled energy at a catastrophic rate. Shields at 40%, 30%, hull breaches on the lower decks. The ship shuddered under the onslaught, but it pressed on, a single point of light driving into the heart of darkness. "We're at the center," Thorn yelled. "We won't get another chance." "Anya!" "Now," Rostova commanded. "Broadcasting the frequency." Sharma slammed her hand down on the activator. A wave of pure, resonant energy, the VAR's last gift, pulsed out from the Vigilance. It wasn't a sound or a light, but a concept, a signal of pure chaos fired directly into the hive mind. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the swarm went insane. The coordinated attack ceased. The black ships turned on each other, their beams of negation slicing through their own kind. The disciplined armada devolved into a self-consuming frenzy, their network shattered, their intelligence broken. The Vigilance, however, was at the epicenter of their death throes. A dozen stray beams struck the ship at once. The bridge tore open, consoles exploding in showers of sparks. A wave of darkness washed over them. Rostova was thrown from her feet. The last thing she saw, the horrified face of Marcus Thorn reaching for her as the universe dissolved into black. When she awoke, it was to the soft beep of a medical monitor. She was in a med bay, not on the Vigilance, but in a planetary hospital. Yorick sat in a chair beside her bed, his arm in a sling, his face bruised but alive. "Welcome back, Captain," he said with a weary smile. "What happened?" she rasped, her throat raw. "Your frequency worked," he explained. "It turned them into rabid animals. They tore each other apart. What was left was a disorganized mess. Our fleet, the civilian ships. We've spent the last week hunting down the stragglers. We won. Ava, we actually won. The Vigilance, destroyed. Thorn, he got most of the bridge crew into an escape pod at the last second. He didn't make it himself. He saved us. Ava, he saved you." The grief was a sharp, sudden pain, but it was mingled with a fierce, burning pride. Thorn, the man of regulations, had made his final choice. Rostova looked out the window at the sky of Haven, a sky that was still there, still blue. A few days later, a message arrived. A Federation fleet, responding to the Stalwart's original, long-delayed report and the subsequent disappearance of the TRAPPIST system from all comms, had finally arrived. Their flagship, the FNS Indomitable, hailed them. Vice Admiral Brenner's face appeared on the screen, stern and imposing. He had come to arrest a renegade. Instead, he found a system saved, a new, terrifying enemy documented, and a legend born. The court-martial of Captain Eva Rostova was the shortest in Federation history. It ended not with a prison sentence, but with a promotion. She was offered command of a new task force, a fleet built to hunt the remaining devourers and take the fight to them. She accepted, but on one condition. Her new flagship would not be some gleaming state-of-the-art vessel. They would salvage the wreck of the Stalwart. They would rebuild it. Stronger than before, its scars a reminder of the price of duty and the cost of holding the line. As she stood once more on the rebuilt bridge of her old ship, looking out at the endless, waiting stars, Rostova knew their war was far from over. But for the first time, humanity was not waiting for the darkness to come. They were going out to meet it.